Hello everybody, I'm Maria and welcome back to my Nook. Today I'm going to be doing the book recommendations tag that was brought to life by Steph Bora, as far as I'm informed. You can go ahead and check her out. I'll try to remember to link her original video down below. Now in her video she's basically asking, I think, 15 questions where you can give book recommendations based on those questions. And I thought I would do this tag because lately I've been doing a lot of reading vlogs, and while I love doing those reading vlogs, I just feel like the schedule that I've been doing them at is kind of stressing me out. This is kind of a circle that I've been going through, and I don't like it because first of all, it's stressing me out, and second of all, I feel like it's impacting my reading because it also means that I'm stressing myself out with trying to read faster. It's a kind of circle, as I already said. And in order to break out of that, I wanted to do this tag also because I saw somebody else do this tag as well, and I thought, oh my gosh, this could be fun because I've never done a tag like that before, and this way I can get ahead of my schedule a little, which will also be great, hopefully. So as you can already see in the background, my bookshelf looks pretty raided, and that is because I've taken a lot of books out of my shelf that I want to show you by answering these questions, and I've got them all stacked up here by question basically. Honestly, without further ado, because I've already been talking long enough, let's jump right into the first question. The very first question is a book you tell people is your favorite, and I want to say A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab is definitely one of those. It's maybe not the favorite of mine because I don't really want to pronounce the favorite, but whenever somebody asks me what are your favorite books, this is definitely very, very high on top of the list of books that come to my mind first. And when I read this question and saw it in the video, my first reaction was also A Darker Shade of Magic. Plus, I feel like it's just so me. Like, this book takes place in London. There's 4 parallel Londons. The magic system is so incredibly cool. The main character is so... I just love this book so much, and I bet you a lot of money that if my friends would read this book, they would probably say, yes, this is very Maria. So I definitely want to mark this book down for this question. I just love it so much. Just looking at this book makes me remember how I felt when I first read it. Oh, so good. The whole series. Also, this book sort of made me fall in love with V. Schwab. It was the whole trilogy, the Shades of Magic trilogy, but like, this was my first dive into V. Schwab's books. So that's also a great thing. The second question is a book that is your guilty pleasure. And to be honest, I was having a really, really hard time finding a book for this question because I don't really have any books that I would consider a guilty pleasure, because I don't really read books with controversial topics or very like dark or heavy themes or anything like that. It's just not usually my thing. So I feel like a lot of books that I say I liked or loved, a lot of people would say that it's understandable. In Steph Bora's video, she said that this can also be a question, as in, like, if somebody asked you what's your favorite book, you maybe would not say this one, and so I chose Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. I really did enjoy this book when I read it last year in, I believe it was May. I was kind of just starting out to figure out what I like in romances and which books I like, which tropes I like, what I don't like, and stuff like that. So I was still rather new to reading in my adult life. I read a lot as a child and a teenager, but then I kind of stopped and only started again in my adult life last year in 2022. I think I am still on a journey trying to figure out what's my type of book. It is YA. It also read very young. I feel like they're in high school, so that's a thing. And it was pretty cheesy in some parts, so I feel like that might be why I'm choosing it for this question. But to be honest, I really enjoyed my time reading this book. It was so cute and fluffy and light and just easy to read. I really enjoyed it. The next question I was able to answer very easily, and that is a book everyone loved but you didn't. And I am sad to report that that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber for me. I know that this series is super hyped and I wish I would have loved this book. The thing is just that something about it just didn't click for me. I don't even know what. This book and this series is basically a spin-off series from the Caraval trilogy. And the Caraval trilogy takes place before the events of this book. They're kind of tied together. The Caraval trilogy provides deeper context for this series, but it's not necessary to read the Caraval trilogy before reading this series. You can understand it pretty fine without having read the Caraval trilogy. And I know that because I read Once Upon a Broken Heart first. And then I did not enjoy it. Like, something about the main character or the plot was just not for me at all. I did not enjoy it, but I really liked the world building and the magic system, and the male main character was also pretty cool in this book. So that's why I picked up the Caraval trilogy, and then I really loved the Caraval trilogy. After I had read that one, the second book in this series came out, and I read that one mainly just because this book ended on a cliffhanger. Otherwise, I would have probably not continued the series, but I did, and even after loving the Caraval trilogy, I still did not enjoy the second book in this series. I don't even remember what it's called. That's probably very telling, honestly. But to be honest, I would love to enjoy this series because, as I said, I love the Caraval trilogy. I love the world building and the magic. And now you're probably asking, why are you still owning this book then? That is because I'm hoping that one day, maybe years into the future, I will reread the Caraval trilogy and then reread this book, and maybe then I'll love it. I don't know. I'm just hoping that one day I'll reread this book and then for some reason suddenly fall in love with it. Because I would so love to love this book. Anyway, next question. A book you read the fastest. Now, I've got 4 books for this question. Not necessarily because I read all of them the fastest. So the thing is, when I heard this question, I immediately thought easy. Good Girl, Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. This is the book I read the fastest. I ate this book up. I inhaled it in 2 days, 2 sittings, and it was gone. That's what I thought, right? But then I went into my Notion app where I track all my reading, and I also write down how many days it took me to read a book, and I saw that it actually took me 6 days to read this book. So my memory served me horribly on this one, and I do not know why I thought that I read it in 2 days when I didn't. This one I thought was the book I read the fastest. And then there's two books, namely Something Wilder by Christina Lauren and Finale by Stephanie Garber. This is a romance book, and this is the third book in the Caraval trilogy. And these two books I actually read for a 24-hour readathon that is also uploaded on my channel if you want to watch that. And I did read both of these in 2 days. Actually read both of these in 2 days, but I don't really want to count this because I only read them that fast because I set myself the challenge to do so. And I feel like I didn't read them that fast because of the books, if that makes any sense. I just read them that fast because of the challenge. So if I hadn't read them for the 24-hour readathon, I probably wouldn't have read them that fast. That is why the book that I actually read the fastest, and this one really surprised me, it was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I would not have thought that this book was the one I read the fastest. I read this book in 4 days. And that is a time that is so fast for me. I mean, obviously, I've read novellas in like 1 or 2 days. I'm a slow reader, and especially last year, I was even slower. Like last year in January, February, it took me 2 weeks to finish one novel of like 300 pages. So reading this in 4 days was probably insane to me back then in summer. It still kind of is, because I would not have thought that I read this book out of all of them that fast. It really surprised me. Sorry in case the camera angle changed slightly. I had to change the battery of my camera because I've been talking for too long and we're not even halfway through the questions, so I'm trying to keep the next ones short. So the fifth question is a book that deserves more hype, and honestly, This Savage Song by Victoria or V.E. Schwab. I know that there's definitely a fan base for this book out there, but I still feel like this book deserves more hype. It is very dark and brutal, so please do check the trigger warnings if you think about picking this book up. But I loved it. I love this concept so much. I love the world so much. I love the main characters so much. I read this book in March, if I'm correct, and I'm still thinking about it all the time. I just loved it so much, and I think even though it probably got hype back when it was published, because it was also published quite a few years ago, I think. I don't even know when exactly it was published, in 2016. So I'm pretty sure it probably got hype back then, but I think it still deserves hype, and it still deserves more hype, in my opinion. A book that is becoming a movie or TV show is the next question, and since I didn't want to have any books repeat themselves, I picked Byyee by Emily Henry. This is also the book that got me back into reading. I know I keep saying that, but it just has such a special place in my heart. I love this book so much. As far as I know, it's being adapted into a movie, I believe. So I'm pretty excited for that, actually. Now the next question was pretty easy for me to answer. It's a book you have reread the most. And the thing is that I don't typically reread books. I am a slow reader, which also means that I barely manage to get to all the books that I want to read new. So like, I don't really have the time to reread books. But the only book I have ever reread is Laura und das Geheimnis von Aventerra by Peter Freund. This is actually a German book, and it's a 7-book series. And these books are chunkers. It's a fantasy series, and the title is basically Laura and the Secret of Aventera. I love this book so much. I was gifted this book by a friend in 2013. There's an inscription, like a little note in this book. I loved it so much. I got the rest of the series standing up here. I've read 6 books out of the 7, and I've just never really gotten around to reading the 7th book because I feel like that's when my reading slump began. Then in, I think, 2015 or 2016, I wanted to reread this book in order to then reread the rest of the series so I could then finally read the 7th book. The thing is that this book has 30 chapters and I only ever reread 29 of those. I know, this is ridiculous, but I never reread the last chapter. I'm still counting it as a reread though. Because that last chapter was like, I don't know, maybe 10 pages long, and I have no idea why I did not just complete the book. But I'm counting it as a reread. And I do sort of have this goal still on my mind that I want to reread the whole series so I can finally read the 7th book at some point, just because that would be such an accomplishment in my mind. And also I want to get that book off my TBR, and there's no other way than rereading all the books and then reading the 7th book. I don't really remember anything that happens in the series. But anyway, moving on to the next question. The next question is a book from a genre you don't typically read. And that is, first of all, a sci-fi book, The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. I read this book in 2019. I mainly read this because I was a huge Tom Holland fan back then, and I heard that he was cast in the movie adaptation for this book. So I was like, I gotta read this book first before I watch the movie. Funny enough, I did read the book, and I read the other 2 books in the trilogy before the movie even came out. This one just really took me in because it was so new, and I do think it was the first sci-fi book I ever read. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and I do think I might go back and read it again at some point. Oh, and then there's also a memoir, which I don't typically read. It's called My Mess is a Bit of a Life by Georgia Pritchett. But I really just loved this book so much. This book is basically full of like anecdotes from the author's life, and they more or less specifically revolve around anxiety and things like that. But they're not that dark. They're not as dark as you would probably expect. They're rather humorous, and honestly this book just spoke from my soul. Now the 9th question is kind of a counter question to the 5th one, and it's, what's a book that deserves all the hype it gets? And honestly, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is probably the most hyped book on my shelves, except for a few books that I have already mentioned. Like, obviously I've read other books that are incredibly hyped and deserve all the hype that they get, but I don't want to repeat books. So this is the one I chose. I love this book so much. My God, did I love this book. I can't even say anything else about it. I love The Crows. I love this book so much, and it deserves all the hype it gets, really. The 10th question is, what's a book you usually recommend when asked to give a recommendation? Now, it usually depends on the person that is asking me. I know that some of my friends read very different things from what I read. Obviously, the way I know my friends, I can kind of give them more accurate recommendations to what they might actually like. instead of giving them just general recommendations. But if somebody just came up to me and said, can you give me a book recommendation? I would probably also ask, like, what genres do you read? What genres do you like? But since romance and fantasy are the genres I read the most, I chose a few romance books and one fantasy book. There are obviously lots of other books that I would recommend, but I've either already talked about them or will still talk about them, so I'm not going to talk about them now. The first romance book I would always recommend is The Love Hypothesis by Ellie Hazelwood. This book was so good and had me in such a grip. I was literally reading it while changing trains. That's how committed I was to reading this book, because I could not put it down. It made me so giddy, so happy. I had the best of times reading this book and I loved it so much. And honestly, Ellie Hazelwood is still one of my favorite authors. And then another romance book I always like to recommend is The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. Romance in STEM, the science field, or anything like that is just so my thing. It's just so my thing. And I loved the main characters in this book. I loved the concept. I loved the romance. Everything about this book. Definitely one of my favorite books I read last year. And then I also often recommend A Brush with Love by Maisie Eddings. I feel like I've never really heard anybody else talk about this book, even though I loved it a lot. It does deal with heavier topics like anxiety and panic attacks and such. I just really enjoyed this book, and that there was more than just a steamy romance, you know, because that's not really my thing. But this book was really lovely. I loved this book a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. And then there's a fantasy book I always love recommending. I can't talk anymore because I've been talking for too long. Anyway, it's Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. My god, this book is beautifully written. The world is so complex. I just cannot imagine how much brain power it must take to come up with a world like this. Holy smokes, really. I just cannot imagine how Laini Taylor did this. And the plot, and oh my god, the characters and the prose, I will never get over this book. Never. I loved it so much. The 11th question is, what's a book that has your favorite characters in it? And for this question, I've got quite a huge stack of books sitting on my lap. So let's just try to go through them rather quickly. First of all, we've got Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is actually the sequel to Strange the Dreamer. And the thing is, I love this world. I love these characters so much. But I just didn't want to mention Strange the Dreamer again, so I chose the sequel for this question. Then there's Killjoy by Holly Jackson. This is a prequel novella to the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. And you will see that I will have mentioned all 3 books in that series by the end of this video. So this one was basically the only one left that I could still mention in this question. I just love that whole series so much. I love Pip so much and her friends. I'm still taking this as a representative book for the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. Then I've got A Perilous Undertaking by Deanna Raybourn, and this book I'm setting also as a representative for the Veronica Speedwell series. Because first of all, I just love that whole series so far. I'm on the 4th book right now and I just love it all so far. And second of all, I don't have the 1st book on hand right now, but I've got the 2nd book. So I'm showing you this one. I just love Veronica and Stoker so much. And then next up, we've got Eric's Ransom by John Flanagan. I was about to say that this is another representing book, but actually it isn't really, because this book holds all my favorite characters from the Ranger's Apprentice series. I've got 7 books from the series on my shelf, and I chose this for a reason, obviously. Then obviously we've also got Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I already mentioned it, I loved Six of Crows so much, and I love the crows so much, but I already mentioned the first book, so for this question I can only mention the sequel. And next up, because I've already mentioned A Darker Shade of Magic, I'm going to mention the sequel to that book, A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. I just love this world and I love these characters, and there's no way I'm not going to be mentioning these as my favorite characters. And then we've got another V.E. Schwab book, and that is Our Dark Duet, the sequel to This Savage Song. As I already said, I love the main characters in this book, and actually I love this book even more than the first book. So that is that. Now the 12th question is a book you could live in. It's The Sorcerer in the North by John Flanagan. I'm taking this as a representative for the whole Ranger's Apprentice series, because I think I like that world. Like, it's not a super intricate fantasy world, but I've also been thinking about some of the fantasy worlds of the books that I really enjoyed, and some of them are quite dangerous or dark, so I don't know if I would like to live in them. But I feel like this one seems fairly chill, and also there are some really cool people in this world. I was already putting all my books back into my shelves when I realized that I skipped a question, and I don't want to do that. So the 13th question of this tag is, what's a book you thought you would hate but ended up loving? And the reason why I accidentally skipped this question at first is because I don't have a book for this question. It's just because I don't usually, or actually I never, pick up books that I think I will hate. I just don't really see the point in that, if I'm being honest. Like, I only pick up books that I think I will like and that I think I will enjoy. Any book that doesn't spark my interest, or where I just think like, ooh, I don't think that's for me, or I think that's not for me, I just don't pick it up, because I don't want to spend my time on something where I don't think I will like it. So I don't have books for this question. But honestly, I think that's not a bad thing. And now back to Maria with the 14th question. The second to last question is asking, what's a book that made me cry? And I've got 2. It's first of all A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab. This is the 3rd book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. And then As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the 3rd book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. And my god, these 2 books just made me bawl my eyes out. I don't think I need to say anything else. Also, they're both pretty dark with their cover designs and spine designs, so that's on brand. But yeah, I bawled my eyes out at these books. Also, like, what's with the 3rd books in trilogies being so sad? And now we're on to the last question. It is, what is a book you wish you could read again for the first time? And absolutely every time I see this question somewhere, or somebody asks me this question, I say A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This was the first, yeah, I think it was the first YA thriller book I've ever read in my life, and it was the best experience. It was such an amazing experience. I still remember the way I was babbling to my dad about theories I had about this book and what happened in this book and who I think did it and what I think happened and stuff like that. I was just so passionate and hyper about this book. That was such a joy. Like, this book was such a joy to read and I loved it so much, and I wish I could read it again for the very first time, for all the twists and turns and everything, and being able to theorize again for myself. Oh my gosh, that was so good. I loved it so much. And now that is finally all. We went through all the questions and all the books I had stacked up around myself. So because I have already talked way too much and I definitely need to drink some water now, I am going to let you guys go. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, maybe give it a thumbs up and perhaps subscribe to my channel. You could maybe, if you want to, and if you want to take the time, answer all these questions down in the comments. And also, since this is a tag, I'm just tagging all of you if you want to do this tag. So otherwise, if you don't want to answer these questions in the comments, you can just tell me anything you would like to let me know. And other than that, I will see you guys in my next video or somewhere else on the internet. Bye!